You've tuned in to New Health Radio on KMUZ 88.5 FM. This is Nate Darnell, your host and producer. And today in studio, I'm both privileged and blessed to have Liz Rogers, who is a filmmaker, in studio today.
I'm very honored. Thank you for having me.
Well, I think it's amazing based on everything that's happening in the world today, Liz, that we just crossed paths, the right place at the right time to get you in studio. So, Liz, you recently produced a documentary with Kevin Flint entitled Hot Water. And this documentary uncovers a tremendous amount of information about the nuclear industry, U.S. politics, and our health. Right. Is this documentary currently in theaters? If not, what's the release date?
Right now, the film is in festival mode. Right now, we're doing a lot of film festivals and some individual and private screenings for nonprofits. We have just signed a distribution agreement, which means it will be in theaters early next year. And we're hoping to tie the premiere of the film in theaters with the anniversary of the disaster at Fukushima. So I'm going to say, hopefully, March the 11th of 2014.
So we're really about 6 months ahead of the curve than what we're talking about today with regard to what the rest of the nation. So those people that are really listening right now, that's amazing.
Yes.
So is it planned for DVD release once it comes out and so people can buy it?
Absolutely. It'll be released on DVD, and then, of course, not long after that, it will be available on Netflix and all of the streaming internet streaming opportunities,
yeah,
so Amazon
you
and
I
Netflix
know, being kind of pseudo-techies, that everything's going away from DVD into the new.
Exactly.
Well, great. So, again, I'm amazed that you're in studio today, and I'd like to follow, as you alluded to, we're on the West Coast, and we've been wrestling with Fukushima, information about that, and so I'd like to kind of follow this particular track as we go through our discussion over the next hour. I'd like to address the documentary Hot Water. I'd like to find out how you really became involved in that and what your kind of driving force was behind doing all the investigative research, because that's not normal, Liz. I mean, people, are largely ambivalent, and to have someone just pick up that baton and run with it, there's something that's fueling you, and I want to figure out what that is. And then also I'd like to address Fukushima and perhaps discover, some more accurate information, facts, and figures surrounding the crisis than mainstream media may be presenting to us, so that we can properly inform residents living in both the Pacific Northwest and in the Southwest about those potential health hazards and what they may be facing. Lastly, I would like to talk about what options we have to protect our health and the health of our loved ones.
Wonderful. Wonderful. All of those are exactly what we need to be talking about.
Well, that was my hope. So why don't we get started just by, a little bit about you, because it's my understanding that you're not new to Salem. You're actually
yeah. I'm a graduate of Salem Academy. That was many, many years ago, unfortunately. But it was a long time ago, 1971. I graduated from Salem Academy when the school was still up on the west side. So Salem is very dear to my heart. And I have family here, and we recently bought a home here. And hopefully we'll be relocating up here from Southern California sometime soon. We have a beautiful place out in the country out here, so I'm very excited about it.
Well, it would be amazing to have you back in town.
Aside from that, my gosh, I started my career in the entertainment industry in Salem. I started in radio at KSLM in 1980. Back then, we had KSLM AM and KSKD FM, and I started then, and that kind of planted the seed. Beyond that, I ended my career at Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank. And the seed was planted for doing documentary films early on, telling stories that matter. I had the opportunity to be involved in a lot of different film productions that are fictional narrative stories. But telling stories that mean something were more important. So the short story is that we were doing a documentary in South Dakota on Native American sacred sites in the shadow of the Sturgis Harley Rally. So there was a real juxtaposition there. And one of our interviews was with a Native American, Charmaine Whiteface, who was talking about some of these sacred sites where they could no longer go because uranium mining companies had come in and demolished the landscape. And when they left all of this ore lying on the ground, the tailings and whatnot. And because of that, if you spend even 24 hours in any of those areas, you'll exceed your annual dose for exposure to radiation. Now, that one brief sentence in that interview just cut me like a knife. I said, what? What are you talking about? And she said, there's no signs, there's no warnings. The cleanup effort is being run by the U.S. Forest Service because the EPA can't handle it. They turn it over to local authorities.
Why can't the EPA handle it?
They're understaffed and underfunded, so they turn a lot of these cleanup efforts over to the local, state and local level.
And do they have the qualifications and the tools to even handle it?
Well, that's what's insane about it. I mean, when I think about cleaning up a nuclear accident or cleaning up a uranium tailings pile, the Forest Service, I mean, that is not the first person I think of for cleaning up this kind of a mess. So all of these things started to just register and resonate in my mind, and I thought, okay, I've got to start researching this further. So I put together a segment for that film about this particular issue as it related to the Native Americans and quickly realized there's just no way. I've got to go back and do a whole film just on that issue, which we did a year later. And again, I thought I was so naive. I was so green. I glowed in the dark. And I thought it was just limited to that one area. But once I started researching it and we got our filming done and realized it's all over the country, it's everywhere. So 4 years later, we had covered 10 states and most of the western United States, and there are just thousands of areas that we weren't even able to touch in this film. So, and during that 4 years, my husband and I lost a couple of very close family members to cancer, and realizing how horrific these contaminants are and the kinds of cancers that they cause in children and young people in particular, fueled that fire. And once I got started, there was no going back. And my husband, God bless him, just kept following me around with the camera. And Kevin Flint, who is the cinematographer and director, was really remarkable in this and have stood by the project all these years and are really remarkable people.
So you started this before Fukushima even happened?
Yes, 2 years before.
Wow.
Right. And we really were just initially concentrating on the water supply, because these mill tailings, when uranium is mined, the mining companies have several different methods. There's open pit mining, there's tunnel type drilled mining, there's breccia-pipe mining, and there's in situ leach mining. And many of these mining processes infiltrate the water system. What people don't understand is that once these elements are released into the water supply, you can't get it out. And alpha radiation in particular is transportable through water. And once it's in your water and it gets into your system, alpha radiation doesn't go away. It's a cumulative effect. So it will impact your kidneys, your lungs, your stomach, your throat, your thyroid, pancreas. All of your filter systems are going to be impacted. If it's in your water and you shower and you breathe the mist, it's in your lungs.
Well, and your skin absorbs too.
Well, your skin is a pretty effective barrier for alpha radiation.
Okay.
It's the interior exposure, the internal exposure, that is incredibly dangerous. And for children in particular, children and young people. It alters DNA. It causes leukemia. there are people in that South Dakota area and in many, many other areas who are in the same situation, where the rates of cancer are many hundreds of multiples over the national averages for very rare brain tumors, for diabetes, for leukemia in these babies, in these little children.
Are these largely restricted to the Indian reservations, or it just happened to be in that area that you investigated 5 years ago? I'm curious to find out if they're being leveraged because maybe there is a restrictive law that prohibits this kind of negative information from being published or talked about because they have that really tight culture.
There is, when we started, we were concentrating to a great degree on the Native American population until we found out how far-reaching it was. And then we realized that we didn't want to just restrict it to that we needed to let everyone know that we're exposed. And I'll give you a brief rundown on the situation at Moab, Utah, where the mining company, Atlas Mining Company, who mined there, left 16 million tons of radioactive waste lying on the banks of the Colorado River.
16 million tons.
16 million tons. Now, for your listeners, if you go to Google Earth and you Google Moab, Utah, you will see the Colorado River as it curves at the end of that valley. And on the opposite side of the river from that town, you can see the pile. You can see this horrific pile of waste, and it's been there for over 50 years.
So does it just flow downstream?
Leaching into the water supply every day, hundreds of thousands of gallons every day, because the river runs through that pile. It's an unlined containment. There's no liner. And the department, the Water Management Department in Southern California, does know about it. They have measured increasing levels of radioactivity in the water at Lake Havasu intake. And the mining company came in, mined the ore, got the permits, made the promises, knew they had to clean it up. And when they realized they couldn't, because you cannot clean it up, they walked away and filed bankruptcy. So now you and I and every other taxpayer in America is paying the bill, $1 billion for that one site, to move that out one rail car at a time. And they project that it will be 2028 before they get it all out of there. And they don't know, they're trying to accelerate to 2017. That project. However, they don't know how far below ground it goes because it's in an unlined containment, and these are heavy metals, and the contamination. They literally have no idea how far below ground this goes.
And once that goes into the silt in the bottom of the Colorado River, you're never going to get it out.
You'll never get it out. There's no way.
You'd have to dredge it hundreds of times over just to.
Exactly. So it's one of thousands of these kinds of sites. Now they dump mill tailings into the Dolores River, which is upstream. It happens over and over again. The Missouri River, the Grand River, the Moro, up in the North Dakota, Nebraska. So the problem is far greater than people realize. How toxic and how poison this stuff is. And we don't have regulations in force, and we don't have an infrastructure in force to enforce those regulations. And individual water departments of these cities and towns, particularly these small towns, but even big cities, don't test for radiation in their water. Nobody tests for it, so they don't know.
Well, I know just outside of the radiation issue, the EPA only tests for, I think, under the Clean Water Act, maybe 100 contaminants maximum. And there are well over 2,500 contaminants that are in our water supply. And from what I understand, even 1,000 additional every single year from all of these new manufacturing processes that leach these plastics and these synthetic chemicals. there's no process legally. And is that simply an issue of ignorance, or do you think it's an issue of convenience? And
I think it's a combination. I made a statement in the film, and it ended up getting cut. But I said, when I was talking about Fukushima, I said, if you don't think this can happen in your neighborhood, you're either ignorant or you're arrogant. And you're going to have to decide which one you're going to be. So if you don't know, you don't know. If you do know, you can't pretend not to know what you know. And you can't unknow it. So if you have poison in your water supply, regardless of the source, and radiation is one of them, and that doesn't discount any of the other thousands of them that are out there. If you have radiation in your water and it's not tested for, then you need to know that you're taking a risk. And you need to know if you get sick, where it came from.
is there any way to test, like for the standard residential home? Is there something you can order online? Do we have to specialists come out?
Yes, you can have the water tested. You can take it. You can test it. There are testing kits that you can buy, but they have to be sent to a lab for testing for alpha, beta, gamma radiation.
Okay.
And those tests aren't cheap. They can be a couple $100. They are not cheap. I know that Oregon does test for arsenic. Arsenic is a byproduct of uranium mining. And so when we had our well tested here, it was automatically tested for arsenic. We didn't test it for alpha, beta, gamma radiation. You won't taste it if it's in your water. You won't see it. You won't smell it. It won't burn you. But you need to know. Now, Oregon doesn't typically have high concentrations of uranium ore. There are some areas in Oregon that do have it, but it's not one of the areas that right now is being focused on for the potential for uranium mining. However, areas like Hanford, Washington, where we're paying $1 billion a year for that cleanup. Taxpayers are paying $1 billion a year, and it's going to go till at least 2060 getting that cleaned up. That contamination is leaking into the Columbia. It's online. We know it. It's been on the news. It's going into the water supply in the Columbia River. Now, statistically, you do research on, or if you were to do really research the levels of cancer and how those things tracked from our Cold War era, from Fat Man and Little Boy all the way through today, and track those cancer levels, you would, how do you even measure the kinds of numbers that we're talking about? It's crazy. Now, one of the other things that I ask people is when you were growing up, how many people did you know who had cancer? Now, you're young. I'm not. When I was a kid, I'm 60. I turned 60 this year. But when we were growing up, we didn't know anybody who had cancer. Didn't know anyone who had cancer. And now, I can't count them all.
The CDC, actually, the American Cancer Society expects that 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will develop cancer during their lifetimes.
I am really sorry to hear that, but I believe that that's probably true. And it's going to be environmental. Yep. And it will be environmental from known and unknown toxins. What I want the uranium and the nuclear industry to acknowledge is they know it's poison. They know they vent these nuclear plants. They know that radiation escapes into the air and into the water. Every nuclear plant, we have 104 of them in the United States. Every nuclear plant has to be on a huge source of water because that's what they use for the cooling and the steam generation. So if they have a problem, it's going in the water supply. If it's in the water supply, you're not going to get it out. The most you can hope is to minimize or mitigate the damage it causes. They cannot fix it. Fukushima cannot be fixed. It's melted down. Reactor 4 is on the brink. moving all of the 400 tons of live uranium and nuclear materials that are in the attic of Building 4 right now, trying to get that out. They've been trying to figure out how to move it out of there for 2.5 years, 3 years in March.
Before we progress on to Fukushima,
Yeah.
I just want to clarify some things with regard to things that I didn't know about existed, the problems that were happening inside our own country. I mean, I've been following Fukushima for the past 2 years, but I had no idea that we had a whole Southwest population that was being subjected to excessive amounts of nuclear radiation exposure.
Right, and I didn't answer your previous question about Native Americans in the American Southwest and in the American West.
Well, and the reason that I ask is because what I found is really interesting is working with a diabetic organization as a research analyst, and that's why I'm privy to some of this information. Of course, diabetes is an epidemic among the Native Americans, then it has to do a lot with their genetic makeup. And then the American diet, which in many ways we forced upon them by taking away their tribal lands where they could have maintained their natural diet.
Right.
But oftentimes it seems that these legal regulations that we put in place have been put in place to take advantage of our native populations. And it unfortunately, it seems that they are still being taken advantage of. So, and even within our own FDA regulations, it's interesting that according to government law, the U.S. government has no right to exercise anything within the borders of Native American tribal land, with the exception of the FDA. The FDA is the only government agency that has overriding authority. So it just seems really interesting to me. I mean, I've seen the politics with Big Pharma. I've experienced the politics with Big Pharma. I've experienced the politics with the AMA. Even when we have mounds and mounds and mounds of scientific evidence saying, look, this natural substance has these amazingly therapeutic benefits on human physiology, yet it can't be marketed, because of rules and regulations. But we can have a drug that has all kinds of side effects and will likely kill you anyway. It will just take longer to do it while you're taking it.
That's right. And genetically modified organisms in our food. One of the films that Elizabeth Kucinich and I worked on together was the new film on GMOs, GMO OMG, which is easily a subject for another hour or two show. But as it relates to Native Americans, in particular in the American Southwest, if you look at the original treaties that were signed with Native Americans, they had huge tracts of land that included fertile farmland. But as the U.S. choked in more and more and restricted and cut those territories more and more, the Pine Ridge Reservation, if your listeners, if you have the opportunity to go and see what life is like on that reservation, I have been to China, I've been to Vietnam, I have been to Cuba, I've been to half a dozen third world countries, and none of them compare to the type of life that these people live on that Pine Ridge Reservation. It's the Badlands. And they're carving out a life there. It's horrific. It's horrific. And they don't get fresh food there. There's 23,000 people on the reservation, and I think there's 2 grocery stores that might have a fresh produce department. But there's many marts that have nothing but processed corn syrup, genetically modified white flour food. I mean, it's
which is exactly
really
what causes diabetes.
Exactly. And this uranium as well, it's in their water. Now, we have in the film that one of the residents had their water checked coming out of their tap, and there's alpha radiation in their water. When I talked to the EPA about it, I went to Denver and interviewed a gentleman at the EPA and asked him about the cancer, and he looked at me right in the eye and said, "Prove it."
Wow.
Yeah. And I'd like to say I'm a lady, but I'm on the radio, and my mother's listening. So I won't repeat what I said back to him, but I was pretty shocked. Prove it. That's what he said. Wow.
So, Liz, I guess this has been going for about 50 years with
Right.
the mining and all that since World War II and the development of the nuclear industry.
Right.
And then I guess along with our development of nuclear power plants, we then went on to design nuclear power plants for other countries.
Correct.
And I'm guessing that Japan received some of those nuclear power plants that we designed and developed. And I'd like to now start talking about Fukushima because during the first portion of the program, we alluded to the uranium mining that's impacting residents in the southwestern portion of the United States. And now on the Pacific North Coast or on Pacific Northwest,
Right.
where we are, we're now being exposed to potentially excessive amounts of radiation from the Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster.
That's right.
And as an analytical type personality with a science background, I personally don't see any way that Fukushima is going to be handled in a way that's not going to have a negative impact on our health
Right.
ever.
Ever. Right.
You know, I think as you alluded to earlier, at this point, it's really a matter of simply mitigating the damage,
Right.
you know, and how can we do that most effectively? But it seems to me that like everything occurring at Fukushima right now is 100% experimental. You know,
That's right.
this was a meltdown of unprecedented magnitude,
Yes.
and I don't see our domestic press or even global press addressing this topic effectively. You know, so it's a blessing for me to have you on the show today because I know that this is your focus, and if anyone can give me kind of like the real nuts and bolts of what's going on and the genuine threat to our health, it's going to be someone like you.
Oh my gosh, that's a terrifying concept because I'm not a scientist. But what's interesting, I think, about my involvement in it is that I'm not a scientist. I'm a regular person who knew nothing about any of this stuff. I didn't know what a picocurie was. I didn't know if it was a millionth or a billionth of a curie, or I had no idea or what that meant, or what the limits mean. When you look at the EPA website and they tell you that your limit for your drinking water is 15 picocuries per liter of alpha radiation. It's the numbers are mind-boggling. So the average person who isn't going to be able to wrap their head around these numbers, they will just absolutely and blissfully stay ignorant of this stuff. So we have to figure out a way to put it in terms where they can understand it and understand the danger. Now, the nuclear industry has millions and millions of dollars at its disposal. The mining industry has millions of dollars at its disposal to lobby on behalf of those processes. Those of us who are trying to enlighten the public have what we bring to the table. We don't have lobbyists, and we don't have that kind of money to really get out there and talk about it. So if you were to talk to any news person or reporter, I mean, there's only a handful really in the country who really understand the depth of this danger. And they may be able to do a story on it, but to really spend the time to educate the public on what this stuff means is going to take a concerted effort. And we have to start with our kids. I tell my children and my grandchildren and now our great-grandchildren, you know, I was one of the hippies. We thought we were going to save the world in the 60s, okay? But we screwed this up. We let it happen. And you guys are the ones who are going to have to fix it. Because you're coming of age and you're voting, and you have to tell your representatives, no. No money, no subsidies for nuclear. I want sustainable, I want solar, I want wind, I want hydro, I want whatever it is. No more. No, no, no.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, with regard to the current crisis happening in Japan,
Yeah.
let's talk about that. Was 2.5 years ago.
March 11th,
Okay.
2011.
So, is it a year and a half? You know, March 11th. Yeah. Okay. So
It's been 2 years. It'll
Okay.
be 3 years.
right.
In,
Okay. So right now, it seems like the public press is downplaying what's happening. At the same time, I'm getting these little snippets of independent reports that are coming in saying we now have cesium levels that are being released into the water that are 4 times what it was when it initially, occurred.
Right.
And this really isn't being talked about. And how is this affecting sea life? How is this coming to the Pacific Northwest via rain? Is it coming via seawater? Is it being picked up and then, rained also in Colorado? Are these things that you're familiar with?
Well, I'm getting more and more familiar with them. And again, at 60 years of age, trying to retain all of these numbers is more of a challenge than for you guys, you younger people. But the challenge is that even if a reporter did a really great job at doing a story on this, even if it was on CNN, if it was on local news, how many people are going to see it and how many people are going to absorb what 4 times the level of cesium means?
Right.
I can't tell you what it means because I don't remember off the top of my head. Is there a safe limit for cesium? Is there, I know the EPA's goal limit for all radionuclides is 0.
But I heard they just tried to change that too, which was increasing the radiation exposure.
That's right.
And to me, that just seems like a political play. Since we can't really reduce the health risk, we're just going to kind of change it on paper. It makes it look a bit more palatable.
It's exactly what they do. And that is exactly what state, local, and federal governments have done throughout history on these issues. Because they know it's poison, they know it's not safe. The goal, if you look at the EPA website, the goal is 0. None, 0. They don't want any in the water supply. But 15 picocuries for alpha radiation, 30 grams per million of uranium in the water. They say it's safe. But if you can't meet that, they change the limit. It happens over and over and over. This is not new. So this is, once again, they're looking at changing it from 15 picocuries per liter to 30 picocuries per liter. So they can say, if you have that in your water, it's within acceptable limits. Well, no. It's not acceptable.
And then people are just going to keep getting cancer or developing other health ailments.
Absolutely.
And then they're just going to say, well, we know there's an epidemic, but we don't really know what the cause is.
Yeah. And they being the empirical they, meaning the nuclear industry in particular and the mining industry in particular, will say, prove it. The EPA said that to me. My associate Sherry is here, and she was with me on that interview. And we both sat there and shook our heads.
So it just seems like to me this is another example of, how we have these multi-billion-dollar transnational corporations, just like with the pharmaceutical industry, where they pay out more money to pay lobbyists than they do in taxes.
Absolutely.
And that's how they set legislation on Capitol Hill. And then the rest of us are kind of left to fend for ourselves. Which is we have to do the really hard digging to figure out what the truth actually is, even though we don't have the resources. We don't have the pocketbook of a multi-billion-dollar transnational corporation.
That's right.
We don't have the string-pulling capability on Capitol Hill.
Right.
And now I'm thinking about all of the fracking that's happening across the Midwest, where they can light their kitchen water on fire because of all of the petroleum byproducts that are coming out of it.
Right.
Now we have radiation in the water in the Southwest. It's like, my Lord.
Exactly. I know.
This could be really disempowering for a lot of people, but at the same time, fortunately, there are people like yourself that have the chutzpah to go out there and do this, and people like me that are willing to spend my time to talk about it and broadcast it out there. So
Thanks
those
to
people
you.
who are interested in taking care of themselves and their loved ones will have access to the most accurate information, and therefore they can make educated decisions instead of just listening to the mainstream media, which in my opinion is largely influenced by transnational multi-billion-dollar companies anyway. They're not telling the truth. They're telling the spin that they want published, and they're trying to get buy-in from the public instead of learning the real reality.
Right. You're absolutely right. Now, oh man, I just lost my thought. Oh, and it was really good. See, I'm 60.
It's okay, but I would like to talk just a little bit more about Fukushima, because that's really kind of on fire right now as a topic. And from my understanding, this is the first time that cores. I mean, and do you have any information on Chernobyl and kind of the history of that? So when I thought about this, and I too am not a scientist, I have a science background, but I looked at Chernobyl and I said, Chernobyl was bad, but it was landlocked. It was on a solid piece of ground. And over time, they eventually entombed it in a big concrete barrier. And that doesn't mean that the radiation isn't present. It doesn't mean that it's not still leaking out, but it's been largely contained. Fukushima is a totally different animal.
Yes.
Fukushima is on the edge of the coast, basically built on a pile of rubbish to build up the land. We have water seeping from a mountainside behind it, up under it. And
undermining the structures.
Undermining the structures.
Yes.
Plus, unlike Chernobyl, where everything kind of burned into the ground, but then stopped, and we could tunnel under it and put concrete under it to stop it from burrowing any further. That's not the case with Fukushima. We have all this irradiated water that's now leaking into the sea. We have cores, several of them which have burned through the cement floor, into the earth, now into the water table. And what they're proposing, the engineers that are trying to find a solution, is to erect a giant wall of ice.
The ice wall.
Yes, which they will then encapsulate this entire nuclear reactor in, at least the whole coast, which is going to require massive amounts of electricity just to keep the ice frozen.
That's
and
right.
then what happens if we ever have another power outage? What happens if we have another tsunami?
That's right.
Now it's going to melt and we're going to have even more problems.
That's right. Pretending that nuclear is safe, one, is ignorant and arrogant because it isn't safe. All you can do with nuclear is decide how much risk you're willing to take and hope it doesn't happen in your lifetime. Now, if the nuclear industry would say, we know it's poison and we know it's dangerous and we know it can kill everybody on the planet, but we're willing to take the risk because it's a measurable risk that I can take that it won't happen in my lifetime. So as long as it's not in my lifetime, and you will hear those words from people, not in my lifetime. Now, Chernobyl, they are constructing a new sarcophagus around Chernobyl because the original sarcophagus is degrading and falling apart, which happens with cement. It's a cement sarcophagus. So that cement is only going to last a certain amount of time. So now they're building a bigger one over the top of it. So if they've dug underneath and put cement underneath it to try to contain that radiation, that's cement, okay? Lifespan of cement. Let's say, gosh.
A couple of decades.
Yeah. Let's be really generous and go 50 years. Let's be really generous and go 100 years. Awesome. Okay. 100 years. In this case, the original sarcophagus lasted 25 years. That nuclear material is going to be deadly to the nth degree for tens of thousands of years. Now, for your listeners who don't know what a half-life is, because I didn't know what a half-life was when I started. These half-lives are immense. The half-life of uranium is 4.5 billion years. Now, it can take dozens of half-lives for this material to degrade.
And just for the listeners, that means that's how long it remains highly reactive or radioactive is 4 billion years.
It would lose half of its radioactive value in 4.5 billion years. And then in the next 4.5 billion years, what's remaining would lose half of its radioactive properties. And then the quarter that's left in the next 4.5 billion years, you lose half of that.
So does anybody know how old the Earth is? How many billions of years do we have to go before?
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, is it selfish, arrogant, ignorant to say, not in my lifetime? That's what you have to say. And if you're willing to say it, then own up to it and say it. The nuclear industry wants to say it, own up and say it. But don't lie to us and don't lie to the public and don't say it's about jobs. Now we talk about Virginia. There's a wonderful movement called Keep the Ban where they're banning uranium mining in Virginia. There's a huge uranium deposit there that they're trying to mine out. Virginia has a very high water table, a lot of rainfall, 43 inches a year in this one particular area where they want to open pit mine uranium.
Does that just kick it up into the air? Is it respirated then, if it's open pit?
If it's open pit, it's in the air, it's in the water, it's in the livestock, in the grain, because the grain's grown in the dirt, the water feeds the grain, the cows eat the livestock, eat the grain, drink the water, it's in them, and nobody checks the beef to see how much radiation is in that.
Does the USDA not have a...
No, they don't check. No. The only checking that is being done now, as far as I know, worldwide, is a little bit of checking in the food in Japan. And that's why they're not doing any fishing exports. The fishing industry there has been decimated. There's a big problem with the rice, with all of the other ag products that Japan produces. Now, to go off on that subject just a little bit, my husband's a member of the Southern California Tuna Club, and he's been a fisherman all his life. And I got an article that said 15 out of 15 bluefin tuna that were caught off the coast of Southern California measured positive for radiation.
And that's 100%.
100%. Now, more and more and more of those fish are being tested, and it's showing up in all of them. So I am a regular tweeter and Facebook poster that says, no Pacific tuna. No Pacific tuna. Now, for old people like me, it's not going to have an immediate impact on me. I have a much lesser chance of having the effects of it. However, infants, children, and young people have a chance of being very seriously affected by this. And the effects are cumulative. So, as those elements go into the water and go into the algae, the plankton, the shrimp, and all of the smaller fish, all of those things are concentrated, bioconcentrated up and up and up the food chain. So as those tuna run that track around the Pacific, that big circle, Japan, up around Alaska, Washington, Oregon, down California, and all around that Pacific Rim, they're going right in front of Fukushima. And if you look at the models that scientists have done, there are models online that show how that water is going to move, how the cesium, the strontium, and all of those elements that are going to move from Fukushima across the Pacific. And the Pacific will be hit, it's already here, but we're really going to be hit next year. 2014 is when they say that we're really going to be hit on the West Coast in the Pacific Ocean in that water supply. So our salmon, it's huge.
And cancer is caused, it takes a long time for most cancers to kind of incubate, and they can be, brewing, for lack of a better term, for years or even decades. So just with a cumulative exposure,
right?
It might be 10, 15, 20 years down the road before people start seeing, or before we as a community start seeing a major uptick in health-related disorders, probably an uptick in cancer.
Right.
And what frightens me is that I still keep seeing this just morass of legal issues and politics, and it's like for the commoner, for us, we look at this and we're like, look, this is common sense.
I remembered what I was going to say. It just came back to me. Okay. For the public to get the information on some of these things, there are some brilliant documentaries. And it's the documentary format that is what is going to make the difference. I'm convinced of it. Because news and television, unless they air a documentary, news shows aren't going to spend that much time concentrating on one of these issues to the extent that they would have to get the information across, to educate people. So in this issue of fracking, for example, the movie Gasland is brilliant. And now they just released Gasland 2, which is a follow-up. Brilliant.
Do you watch Link TV?
I don't have Link.
Okay. Because I saw that on Link TV.
Did you?
Yes. And it's a channel that only does documentaries. And documentaries for deep thinkers.
Yeah. Netflix, my grandkids. I mean, my 10-year-old grandson was with me one weekend, and I said, "What do you want to watch?" He said, "Well, let's watch a documentary drama. Let's watch a doc." And I went,
Wow.
"Oh, please, you're so in my will." But Gasland is one, a brilliant movie that won the Academy Award a few years back called Chernobyl Heart. Documents the impact of the meltdown at Chernobyl on the children in that area and the heart damage that these children have and are dealing with. And, if it's an hour and a half documentary, and if that's what it takes to really get you educated, spend the hour and a half. Hot Water, this film is 80 minutes long right now. It could have been 10 hours easy with the amount of information that we uncovered. And editing it down has been difficult, and it's long. But the kind of information that people need to know can be very complex. If you're okay with just knowing it's poison, don't take it because it will kill you. And if you think it's in your water, you need to know. And you need to know what it will do to you and your kids and your grandkids.
But that may not be enough to really change legislation.
That's right.
That's enough to kind
Absolutely
of protect you.
right.
But if we really want to change legislation so we have a better future
Right.
for our loved ones, our kids, our grandkids, then we
Right.
need to know the technical stuff.
That's right. You need to know. I mean, how long did it take us to put smoking will kill you on cigarette packs?
Oh, my goodness. It's so funny that you brought that up because I was at a medical symposium last night. And they actually had advertisements from like Time Magazine
Oh,
from like
man.
40 or 50 years ago where they had physicians advocating cigarettes.
Yes.
They were
Oh,
like,
yeah.
these are the brand that I smoke.
That's right. It's insane. Now, in the film, I have a lot of old civil defense footage. Duck and Cover, Bert the Turtle. I mean, I had one that it is not in this version of the film. It's a cold cream commercial from the 50s where the narrator says, "Busy you in and out of doors all day long. Imagine the amount of dirt that accumulates on your skin." And then they say, the dirt on this woman's skin has just enough radiation in it to measure on this Geiger counter. And they hold a Geiger counter up to her face. And they said to prove that Dorothy Gray cold cream cleans 2.5 times better than any other soap or cleanser on the market. And the look on this woman's face, I mean, it's like she got shot, but they're holding a Geiger counter up to her face. And this was so common. It was so common. We were heroes for having the bomb back then.
And I remember a story too about Arizona. There was actually a factory where women were employed to paint
Yes.
glow-in-the-dark
Yep.
hands on the clocks.
On watches.
And it was a radioactive material.
Yep.
And many of these women had amputations later
That's
in
right.
life. They had all kinds
That's
of...
right. Mm-hmm. That's absolutely right. Glow-in-the-dark watches were done with radioactive material. There's an element called, and you can find this on eBay, tens of thousands of pieces of this. It's uranium glass. I have a couple of pieces that I usually carry with me to festivals and whatnot. Salt and pepper shaker made of uranium glass. And I have a portable Geiger counter, a little Radex, a little digital Geiger counter, and set it next to this thing, and you just watch it go tick, tick, and then start going beep, 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 beep. There were
That's not
tens
going to
of
change for
thousands of
4
pieces.
billion years.
No, not at all. No. I mean, there were serving plates, dishes, glasses, cups, pour it in there, drink it right down. I mean, the ignorance with which we formed our policies is mind-boggling. And another point that I made in the film was that there are a lot of people my age who grew up believing this stuff, that you could duck and cover and you'd be okay.
Well, look at the childhood training films where they were like, get underneath your school desk if the bomb
Exactly.
goes off. What is that going to do?
Exactly. And these guys my age are running Washington, D.C.
That's a frightening
We're
thought.
in big trouble. I know. And I said that in the film. We are in big, big trouble. Now, my husband had the opportunity to go to the White House Christmas party this last year. And he had a conversation with some pretty recognizable names in politics back there. And one in particular, I mean, these guys have no idea. They have absolutely no idea. They don't know this stuff. They don't know it like I didn't know it when I started.
Well, in a way, that's not surprising to me. I didn't share my history when we first started the conversation, but I grew up as a military brat. I spent about 15 years on one of the most secure Air Force bases. Air Force One was 4 blocks from my house, and at least the hangar. And I'm very familiar with the fact that a lot of people on Capitol Hill have no idea what they're doing, and I don't even know what they're doing there. I have a lot of personal experience with this.
Boy, is that a subject for another show.
I mean, it's really frightening, and I think I used to have a phrase that was something along the lines of, we don't need more politicians wearing white lab coats masquerading as scientists.
That's right.
We need more scientists that are developing political savvy
That's
to
right.
do what is right.
That's exactly right. You're exactly right. Exactly right. Now, I've got a clip in the film of 4 guys playing poker in a bomb shelter, and they're all smoking cigarettes. I mean, you can't see the wall across the room because there's so much cigarette smoke in the room. And the bomb goes off overhead, and the narrator says, the effects of the explosion are strong but short-lived, so it's safe to go in the area underneath the explosion 2 minutes after it occurs. Wow.
Was this an Army training video?
Really? Yeah. Seriously. Incredible. And there was another one that I cut from the film, but it talked about housekeeping, good housekeeping, and how if you're a good housekeeper, it would make your home less susceptible to the impact of a nuclear explosion because you wouldn't have so much stuff lying around that could be
That almost just makes me
flammable.
want to kind of break out and laugh right now, because I'm looking at all of the, patriarchal politics and everything else right now
know.
that I'm thinking about. Just little Susie, just keep dusting away.
Yeah,
It'll be
keep
fine.
the house clean.
Oh,
Yeah,
my word.
and you'll have a better chance of having your home survive a nuclear atomic blast.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So with
Yeah.
that said, we're going to start running short on time here, and I wanted to open up a little bit of dialogue about what we can do. I know
Right.
the long-term agenda is informing the community, making
Right.
sure that those specifically in the Southwest, Pacific Northwest know exactly what we're facing right now, then beginning to educate the population so we can start moving towards better regulation, impacting legislation. But that's going to take years. Just
And
like
enforcing the regulations we have, which are lame at best.
Right.
Enforcing this stuff. Education and enforcement of these regulations. And we, the people, have to force that to happen with our representatives, period. And we have to be educated, and we have to educate them. So I hope that there's 100 films like mine that get done, and that every one of those films becomes a part of the education in our schools, that kids see this at a young age. So they can look at their parents like we looked at ours when we were teenagers and go, man, you guys are so out of it. What were you thinking? Like my kids say to me now. And I say, well, we weren't thinking at all. We were putting daisies in the, ends of rifles and, singing Beatles songs and completely ignoring what was going on at a deeper level. So we have to educate the kids, and we have to starting there. And with each and every one of us, if you don't know who your representative is in Congress, you need to find out, and you need to make sure they know that you know what they're voting on and how they're voting, and you need to make sure they know what you think and how they should be voting on these kinds of issues. We have Hanford, Washington. We have the Savannah River site. There's just as a brief example, there's one mining company that walked away, filed bankruptcy, walked away from 2,700 toxic waste sites. Sold themselves to another company for $18 billion and walked away. And you and I are going to pay for every bit of that cleanup. Billions and billions and billions of dollars every single year that you and I have to pay while those companies walk away with the cash.
And the big companies don't even pay taxes anyway.
Well, there you go.
I mean,
There you go.
Not only do we experience the brunt of all the health maladies, now we have to experience the brunt of cleaning up the rubbish they created.
Right.
That's
Even if they do pay their taxes, even if they do pay their taxes, that doesn't mean it doesn't come out of our pocket too. You and I are still paying, even if they pay their fair share. Bless them if they do. I've got my suspicions that they don't, but even so, you and I are still paying for every one of these sites. Thousands and thousands. One company alone has 2,700 toxic waste sites.
Wow. So while we're working on legislation and all this stuff, what do we do in the interim to protect our health? I mean, are there any viable options that you're aware of? As far as food, as far as taking iodine, what can we do to filter stuff out of the water?
Okay, there are very few options for cleaning alpha and these radionuclides out of water. One of them is reverse osmosis water systems. We had one on our boat, which is it's a desalination plant, but they're filters that can remove a lot of those elements. They aren't cheap.
Right.
And the average family would have a difficult time affording those. There's another one that they're working on that has a lime extraction, kind of a clay and lime extraction system that they're working on that will pull some of that out.
But those filter very, very, very fine, so they can pull out all of these, very small metal particles, uranium particles, at least 90% or more of them.
Correct. For example, the island of Catalina has their entire water system as one of these huge desalination plants, but it's going to be hard to move the rest of the country there to get their drinking water.
Sure.
But beyond that, it's very limited. Now, bottled water, you'd have to find out. Does your bottled water go through one of these systems?
That's
Probably
an amazing
not.
point, though, because
right.
we already know that municipal water treatment plants, number one, weren't designed to pull out synthetic pharmaceutical medication residues,
That's right.
which are now in our water supplies, which weren't
Right.
there 50, 60 years ago.
Right.
They obviously weren't designed to pull out radioactive material.
Right.
And bottled water companies, for those listeners that aren't aware of this, big bottling companies have bottling plants in every single state so that they don't have to adhere to federal legislation. Right. So they're just going to take the water out of the Colorado River, out of the Willamette River.
That's right.
They're going to do a pseudo-purification process on it. Then they're going to put it in a bottle, a plastic, which costs a lot of, it produces a lot of toxic chemicals, costs a lot of energy to make, and then they're going to sell it to you for a bunch of money, and they're going to make more money than they would even make on oil.
That's right.
And you're getting water that's not any healthier for you.
That's right. That's right.
That's a raw deal.
It's a raw deal. And that plastic, boy, I mean, they say, you leave a bottle of water in your car and then drink that water, you're getting more toxins that were in the water if you went down to the river and grabbed a cup right out of it. So,
bummer.
Yeah, kind of depressing. I know. I know enough about this subject now to be really, really annoying at dinner parties. And
we're in good company then. We're going to have a great conversation.
We're going to have a great dinner
it's gonna be
tonight.
Awesome.
I know.
But on a side note, because I can totally empathize with what you're saying there, but I spend so much time reading over the options, and because of my background in the military, because of my background working with a health education organization, specifically around diabetes, and diabetes, it's a global epidemic. I mean, right now, it's worse than the bubonic plague. I mean, as far as stats are concerned.
That's right.
And so, we look at, well, how can we mitigate that?
Right.
And I've been working very closely with university-level researchers, with Fulbright scholars, and we've even been looking at diatomic hydrogen. And diatomic hydrogen, hydrogen is the greatest quantity element in the universe. There's no other element that's, basically the entire sun is made out of hydrogen. And what's very unique about it is that it's an extremely powerful antioxidant. And it's the only one that's small enough to fit right through cellular membranes and right through the blood-brain barrier, so it can arrest oxidative stress happening in the brain. So things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome are the result of mitochondrial dysfunction, which are our little energy cells. Hydrogen can slip through and actually arrest all the free radicals. What I found really interesting in doing my research is that we knew about this in the 1960s and 70s. As a matter of fact, NASA knew it about it in the early 60s when they were developing the Apollo and Gemini space capsules. And none of the medical research was allowed to occur stateside. I had to find all the medical research in Japanese databases.
Wow.
And so what we're looking at now is just like you explained, we've reached the point to where we can't stop what's happening with Fukushima. Right. It's going to take years to stop what's happening with the uranium mining. Right. And ironically enough, when I was in Washington, D.C., my neighbor was the chief scientist who was investigating cell phone radiation exposure. And I saw what happened after that news broke. And I'm not going to go into that dialogue on the air on this program. But the one thing that I learned was that there are scientific studies that are always obscured in order to maintain the political agenda of those who are on Capitol Hill, and to the detriment of a lot of members of our communities. And what came out of all the cell phone research was that none of the countermeasures that the U.S. military had known about for decades were ever implemented with our current cell phone towers. And now all of us are walking around in this electro-smog.
Yes.
And there's really no way to not walk through it. So we have to start thinking differently. It's not just about stopping that kind of development or putting shields around them. Now we have to be even more proactive. Now we have to figure out what can we do to supplement our health? What can we do to not just wear a shield, but now just like with the alpha radiation, once you consume it, it's going to be there.
That's right.
Right? So how do you suppress it?
Well, and you said it, being proactive, getting the public involved, educating the public about this cell phone issue. I'm getting more and more familiar with it all the time. I've started to use headphones instead of holding the phone up to my head.
Well, and as a producer, I mean, you're going to be on the phone all the time now with the new film. So we definitely have to get you a headset because I've got to have you on more.
I'm so happy to come back anytime.
And now you've got a whole new documentary coming out with the GMO stuff. And so, yeah, we've got to keep you around.
Oh man, I'm in. I'm in
We're
for the long
going to load you
haul.
with all kinds of hydrogen and headphones and keep you coming back.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I know we've gone a little bit over. I think you're getting the evil eye from the engineer.
No worries. It's going to be worth it because this is the information
thank you.
that everyone in the United States needs to know about. So
Thank you. I apologize for not having an easy answer. And that is the bad news, and that's the bad news because what I found out of the stuff that isn't fixable with Fukushima, they're talking about putting old tanker ships in the water off of Fukushima and storing the contaminated water in tanker ships on the ocean. I mean, how lame and desperate are you to just
and that's
not
exactly the point.
Have
they are
a
desperate.
Clue.
Yeah.
Absolute desperation.
Yeah. So let's do this. I've got to close the show for today. It was an absolute blessing having you on the show.
Oh, thank
and
you.
We're going to get you back as soon as possible.
I'll be back in Salem in December. So.
And again, this was Liz Rogers, the filmmaker who produced Hot Water. And Liz, is there a website that our listeners can go to learn more about this?
Yes, absolutely. The website is Zero, Z-E-R-O, hotwater.com. Okay. And we're just putting up our new website. The old website is up, but the new one is going to have a lot more information on it, a lot more interactive information about screenings, upcoming screenings. And hopefully maybe we can arrange to do a screening here in Salem sometime of the film. It would be great. So we'll see what we can work out.
Okay. Well, this is Nate Darnell. We've gone a little bit over the hour here with New Health Radio. And if you have any questions or comments regarding today's show and interview with Liz Rogers of Hot Water fame, please email me at newhealthnation@gmail.com. Again, that's newhealthnation@gmail.com, spelled with an N-U. And tune in again next week for the next edition of New Health Radio with Nate Darnell. And until then, this is Nate Darnell wishing you well.